Hi guys, and welcome back to the next Inktober video here on my YouTube channel. So jumping right into this one, I will be using color in this piece, as you can probably tell from the thumbnail, and I have to say I have absolutely loved using colors in this Inktober as opposed to last year. Last year I started off strong with just the gray stuff, but I wanted eventually to be able to incorporate some colored inks, but I made that a rule for myself last year, and this year I knew that I wanted to change that up. So I built that into my rule set for this Inktober to make sure that there's continuity and being able to use color to have a storytelling element to it, but also to allow me to break out of a certain repetition. I've been really enjoying that. It feels like a special secret tool that I have in my pocket that I can pull out when I need to. But let's just jump right in with this piece. And starting from the beginning, I had actually a pretty clear idea of the pose that I wanted for this piece, of her coming towards the camera. I also knew that I wanted there to be a foreshortening effect, or one of the hands was a lot closer to the camera or the viewer and the other would be a lot farther away. So we'd get this larger, smaller hand effect. And I'm looking for ways like that, different techniques that I can get more three-dimensionality to my pieces, especially for ones like this where it features a character mainly, because I definitely struggle with that. I really do, with getting more depth in pieces. And when it's an environment, it's a little bit easier to layer things or actually use perspective lines to make things look actually three-dimensional. But my brain just doesn't naturally think that way. So finding things that I can remember and use and bring up in the future to be able to get a little bit more motion and energy and depth into my pieces will be really helpful. But I really love that. I loved getting this foreshortened look. I took references of myself. There was just no point in wasting any time trying to find references elsewhere. So I took a video camera and I just acted out the motion of wading through water, which was surprisingly difficult, not actually having any water. But I made sure that I had one arm that was a lot closer to the camera and one that was farther away so I could get that general motion that I wanted. But the thing in the drawing design phase that I struggled with for a certain amount of time was actually the water. So I wanted there to be energy and movement in it, and I wanted there originally to be like this splash, like she's just plowing through the water and it's splashing up around her. But I've definitely learned that when it comes to Inktober, where things have to be done quickly, I have to make executive decisions on what decisions I'm making within my pieces, which ones make the most impact, and which ones are worth the most amount of time. And I realized that I was spending a lot of time trying to find good reference and trying to analyze how splashing water looks and how I could interpret that into my style and how to draw it. And when it comes down to it, when I have more time to spend on something like that, I can absolutely spend the time to figure it out and to decrypt it, basically. But when it comes time to something like this in Inktober, where I need to just move on, I'm getting a little bit better at this, but I need to make specific decisions so that I can make the best piece I can without getting hung up on these little details like that. So after realizing that I'd spent at least an hour just looking for reference and I'd barely even sketched anything that looked like splashing water, I realized that I needed to cut myself off, that I needed to find a solution that I could do and do well, and that I would enjoy the end product and wouldn't necessarily fall under that first thought that I had. And that's when I switched to having the water swirling more around her and having almost its own life and its own current, which honestly fits with the story a lot better, and it has a lot more movement to it than that original idea was. So I'm way happier that I went with this rather than trying to make that other one work. I know that even if eventually I did make that splashing water look right, it would not have had the same direction that this piece had and the water that it ends up having. So I'm much happier with that, and I'm definitely a lot happier with me being able to be more aware of some of my challenges when it comes to sketching and some of the issues that I have. And yeah, I feel a lot better about that. It feels really good to start paying attention to that kind of problem that I have so that moving forward, I can be really purposeful when it comes to designing things. I can choose the things that are really worth the time and I definitely want to learn how to figure out. And then I can spend that time figuring it out and I can make sure that it's worth it. So I will tell you the big thing that I learned on this piece, which is kind of opposite of what would have happened had I listened to my own advice. But I always say, and I always try to tell myself this, is that I need to learn everything about all of the tools and the media that I'm going to be using. I want to figure out how each pigment of watercolor works because they behave differently. Well, I kind of let that slip. So when I was using this ink, which is actually a fountain pen ink, it's really, really gorgeous. I used a combination of two. It's the same one that I used in my last piece, actually. I want that same red following through, but I didn't really remember / realize how reactivatable it is. Once I got anywhere close to that dried red ink with another water ink wash, I should say, it just reactivated like that and bled right into the next layer. And for the background, I really loved that look. I wanted it to branch out from beyond just that border between the water and the background. So I really loved that effect and I was happy with that. But when it came to her hands later on, when I'm adding that ink wash, I did get a little bit too close and that red definitely bled into that ink wash on her fingers, which I didn't like so much, but that's okay. It's again, it's just something to learn. And that's, I think, something that I need to be careful on both sides. I needed to be more careful when I was using the red so that it didn't get on the line work at all if I could avoid it. And then I need to be careful when I was going in with the ink wash on top of the hands to make sure that I was avoiding that. But really the most important lesson from this is to make sure that you know the tools that you're using and the paints or the inks or whatever you're using to know how they actually behave and how they behave together. That way you can see these problems coming. So the best way that I should have done it is I actually should have done the character first and then the background, since I wanted there to be a bleed for the background for the water to the background. There we go. I would want to do those pretty close together / doing the water first and then the background. That way I could dip into that and bring it into that gray background. But if I had done her first, she would have been ready and set, and then I would have painted the red around her carefully, and there wouldn't be any chance of it bleeding into the figure. But again, that is something that as I use more of this red ink going into the future, I can remember that and make sure that I utilize that a little bit better. And when I did go back over adding highlights onto her hands, I was careful to cover up that slight pink stain from the red as much as I could with those highlights. And I have to say, adding those white highlights to the water was my favorite part of this piece. It was just really pleasant and satisfying to watch it happen. So I used a combination of white inks to create this. I used my typical Jelly Roll white gel pen, and I'll have a link to that and everything else that I'm using to create this painting down in the description. But I used that. I also used my brand new PH Martin, I believe it's called Pen White. I will definitely have a link directly to this ink, white ink that I'm using, but it is so opaque. I'm so happy with it. It's way, way better than that first ink that I bought at the beginning of the Inktober. It's super opaque, and it doesn't have that effect where it like leaches the ink wash below it and then makes it more of a gray color. It just stays white. So I actually use them both, and the reason for that is that when I went in with the gel pen, it actually reactivates that red color. So it tints the gel pen a little bit of this like pink color, which I actually really liked because it had more of a second read to it. And then when I went in with this white ink in the bottle, it was very, very white. So it had the strongest impact. And then the gel pen had this like second read where it was a little bit more in between the highlights and the red itself. And I love that effect. It was actually completely accidental, but it was something that I loved, so I continued using it throughout the piece. And that helped it so that the white wasn't too overwhelming and it didn't cover too much of it. It still had a hint of that red even in some of the white line work. There we go. And I think really the only thing that was different and new with this piece is I actually used a little bit of salt for the background, for the gray area of the background. And I like it. I'll use more of it for sure. I find that it's easier to use with the hot press paper where it's smooth. I think it's just easier for me to brush it off afterwards than it is for the cold press. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just that the salt gets in those little grooves and it's a little bit harder to pry out of it, but I found that it was a little bit easier, and I love the effect. It looks really cool, and it does these amazing ink wash textural things. So I'll definitely be playing more with that salt texture kind of a thing. And if you'd like to own this original painting, I have her available at my shop. There's a link down in the description that'll take you right over there. And don't forget to stay tuned for the Kickstarter that we'll be launching for this year's Inktober book. I can't wait to show you guys some of the stretch goals that I have and extra goodies. They are better than last year, so I can't wait to show you guys. I had a lot of fun creating them, but hopefully it will be launching at the beginning of next week if all goes well. So I let you guys know on Saturday when it will be launching. But that is it for me today. I will have a little schedule down below on where you can find me throughout the week through Inktober, so you can interact with me on different places, but that's about it for today. I will be back on Saturday with my next video right here on YouTube for you guys. So thank you so much, and I'll see you then.